The air in Santa Cruz, California, on January 25, 1973, was thick with the scent of redwood and rain, a deceptive tranquility that masked a terror few could comprehend. In a secluded, ramshackle cabin nestled deep in the mountains near the famed mystery spot, a young mother, Kathy Francis, was playing Chinese checkers with her two small sons, 9-year-old David Hughes and 4-year-old Daemon Francis. They were safe, or so they thought, cocooned in their small world. But outside, a storm of madness was brewing, driven by a man who believed he was a sacrificial savior, a man whose delusions had already claimed multiple lives, and who was now on a collision course with this unsuspecting family. This is the story of a tragic day when a mother and her children became the collateral damage in a serial killer's desperate, bizarre quest to save the world from an earthquake that existed only in his mind.
Remember to comment, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of the Calendar of Crime.
The early 1970s in Santa Cruz County were a time of unsettling duality. On one hand, it was a picturesque coastal haven, a magnet for the counterculture movement, a place of natural beauty and laid-back living. On the other, it was a breeding ground for unimaginable horror, a place that would soon earn the grim moniker of the murder capital of the world. This was due, in no small part, to the simultaneous and entirely unrelated rampages of two of America's most notorious serial killers, Edmund Kemper, the Coed Killer, and Herbert William Mullin, the man who would come to be known as the Earthquake Killer. Herbert Mullin was, by all early accounts, a promising young man. He was an intelligent, sensitive boy, voted most likely to succeed in high school.
But a devastating car accident that killed his best friend shortly after graduation seemed to shatter his fragile psyche. This tragedy, combined with heavy drug use, spiraled him into a profound mental illness.
Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, Mullin began to hear voices, which he claimed were telepathic commands from his father and others.
His central terrifying delusion was that a massive earthquake was imminent, and the only way to prevent it was through human sacrifice.
He believed that if he killed, he would be saving countless lives.
Mullin's killing spree began in October 1972. His victims were seemingly random, chosen to fulfill his twisted, self-appointed mission.
A homeless man, a hitchhiker, a Catholic priest, each death was, in Mullin's mind, a necessary offering.
But his path of destruction soon led him back to people he knew, and on January 25, 1973,
his delusion intersected fatally with the lives of the Francis and Hughes family. The connection was Jim Gianera, a high school friend of Mullin's who was now a known drug dealer in the Santa Cruz area.
Mullin, believing he needed a new sacrifice, decided to kill Gianera.
But before he could, he made a stop at the remote cabin of Kathy Francis. Kathy, whose full name was Kathleen Louise Prentice Francis, was 29 years old. She was a mother to two young boys, David Michael Hughes, 9, from a previous relationship, and Daemon S. Francis, 4, her son with her husband, Bob Francis. The family lived a simple, secluded life in the mountains, a world away from the violence that was about to engulf them. Mullin arrived at the Francis cabin, soaked from the persistent rain, and asked Kathy if Jim Gianera was there. Kathy, unaware of the danger standing before her, simply told him that Jim and his wife, Joan, had moved to a new address on Western Avenue in town. Mullin thanked her and left. In that moment, Kathy Francis became a loose end, a potential witness who could connect Mullin to his next intended victim. Mullin, terrified of being caught and having his mission interrupted, could not allow that. Mullin drove to Western Avenue and found Jim Gianera. When Gianera let the casual acquaintance into his home, Mullin, in a moment of psychotic rage, screamed, "You're claptrapping me," and shot Jim. As Jim, wounded, stumbled upstairs where his wife Joan was taking a bath, Mullin followed and shot them both in the head. In a horrifying display of overkill, he then used a hunting knife to stab both corpses repeatedly. The Gianera's infant daughter was in the house, miraculously unharmed, but their bodies would be discovered later that day by Joan's mother. The murder of the Gianeras was only the beginning of the day's horror. Mullin's paranoia took over. He knew Kathy Francis could identify him as the last person to ask for Jim Gianera. To protect his freedom and, in his mind, to ensure the success of his world-saving mission, he had to silence her. He drove back to the Francis cabin, parking his station wagon down the muddy road to avoid getting stuck. He burst into the small wooden shack. Inside, Kathy Francis and her 2 sons were still engaged in their innocent game of Chinese checkers on the bunk bed. The sudden, violent intrusion must have been terrifying. Mullin opened fire, shooting Kathy in the chest and head. He then turned his weapon on the 2 boys. 9-year-old David Hughes and 4-year-old Daemon Francis were shot dead as they sat on their bed. In a final grotesque act of rage and ritual, Mullin stabbed all 3 of the already deceased victims with his knife. The scene was one of unspeakable carnage. A peaceful family annihilated in a moment of pure, unadulterated madness. The bodies were discovered soon after, sending a fresh wave of panic through the Santa Cruz community. The sheer brutality of the crime, the murder of a mother and her 2 young children, shocked even the most hardened investigators. Initially, suspicion fell on Kathy's husband, Bob Francis, who was in Berkeley at the time on a drug deal. He was questioned extensively but was ultimately cleared as a suspect. The police were now hunting a killer who seemed to strike without pattern, a ghost moving through the redwoods. Mullin's spree, however, was nearing its end. On February 13, 1973, he claimed his final victim, 72-year-old Fred Perez, who was working in his driveway. A neighbor witnessed the shooting and, in a stroke of luck for the terrified community, was able to give police a description of the killer and his vehicle. Mullin was arrested a short distance away. His reign of terror, which had claimed 13 lives in just 4 months, was finally over. The trial that followed was a surreal spectacle, a dizzying display of Mullin's fractured mind. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and his defense attorney presented his bizarre theories to the court. Mullin claimed he had received telepathic permission from his victims, including the boys in the tent he had murdered, and that his actions were a necessary sacrifice to prevent a cataclysmic earthquake. He ranted about conspiracies, reincarnation, and his self-proclaimed status as the designated leader of my generation. Despite the clear evidence of his mental illness, the jury ultimately found Herbert Mullin sane and guilty of 10 counts of murder in August 1973. He was sentenced to life in prison. The verdict brought a measure of closure, but it could never erase the horror he inflicted. The murders of Kathy Francis, David Hughes, and Daemon Francis remain a stark, painful reminder of the thin line between sanity and madness, and the devastating consequences when that line is crossed. Their story is a tragic chapter in the dark history of Santa Cruz, a history forever marked by the senseless violence of the earthquake killer. Thanks for watching. Please comment, share, like, and subscribe for future episodes from the Calendar of Crime.